Constitution must be. And having set the objective of the Constitution, you then frame a Constitution to achieve that objective.
Because we really do have a race problem. Those divisions are real. We see it in our politics, we see it in our trade union. We see that they take the divisions with them. Look at where people live in this US. You have enclaves in the Bronx and in Richmond Hill and in Brooklyn. They're taking the division with them.
Women are dying in the streets, and we have a government pontificator running around campaigning for women's vote. No women should vote in this election coming up unless there is something done to the legislation as Magistrate Kim is advocating.
That voices like ours that are not in the political trench fighting it out, voices like ours should become stronger. One of the things about the Caribbean is that we have never had one discourse. Bass will know the days of the New World and the Old World and the radical left and so on. What we had was this concourse of ideas, which I think in the early days of independence pushed us in a certain direction. We've got to move back to that point of having these multiple discourses.
Good night all. Good night to our viewers in Guyana and around the world. Good night to the Globespan team. Before we get going tonight, let me just say thanks first off to the Globespan team for making tonight's program a success. It will be a success, I know. To Kumar, Devin, and all our technical guys working behind the scenes, we appreciate what you're doing. Viewers, good night. In all the political spins and in the political talks presently ongoing in Guyana, we hear every day, every single party talk about constitutional reform. Every presidential candidate is talking about sugar, jobs, taxes, and a whole gamut of promises, but very little is being said by the presidential candidates that is substantive enough about oil. Maybe they are in many ways out of depth in oil itself. Maybe the oil slick has already gotten some of them. But in my mind, no one is creating the necessary tsunami about the contracts, and nothing is being said about renegotiating contracts and getting to the core of oil and the benefits of Guyana. More wells are surely going to be forthcoming, but the rottenness of the contracts seems to be continuous. Meanwhile, we still have the oil-producing countries, past and present, to learn from. And speaking of oil, we have to be cognizant of local content, of wealth fund, and all the 360 degrees of effect that oil can have on us and that we can influence our country. Creating a wealth fund is not necessarily easy, but it is virtually the easy part. The challenge for this country is to ensure that the grubby fingers of corrupt politicians are not slipping into these wealth funds for personal gains and party patronage. In many ways, many politicians are already spending the money in one way. That is, in their zero analysis giveaways to those who they deem the needy. In other words, without any proper studies, many politicians are already promising to give away monies to sections of the population that they and their party will determine as lesser fortunate or as needy. But the Guyanese populace must awaken to the fact that a proper investment, use, and management of the wealth fund will create much greater wealth for them all, instead of greasing of the fingers in empty cash promises. The truth is, whether it's 2, 20, 50, or 100 years, this resource, the oil resource, will one day be depleted. And we must ensure that we, the people of this country, can revolutionize our thinking and our acceptance or rejection of politicians who muck around our future and the future of our children. Trinidad is one such country that has gained massive experience in doing all that it needed to do to create a resource from a resource that it can take to the future. In Guyana, we have to be cognizant of what our neighbors and what the rest of the world has done. To put it in numbers, Trinidad is one of the countries that has built up massive reserves at one time surpassing, I believe, 15 billion US dollars. It started in 2007, and currently, according to the SWF Institute, the current assets is at 6.1 billion US dollars. To our viewers out there, you might be amazed to know Norway has crossed $1 trillion in assets. China has over 940 billion and more than 1.5 trillion if you combine China without Chinese savings. United Arab Emirates has over 820 billion. Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, even Nigeria has over 2 billion and India has 3.8 billion. So the question is, what do we as Guyanese plan to do? Yes, local content is extremely important, and the empowering of the people of this country is equally of utmost importance. As I said earlier, elections time coming, as we say in Guyana. And the general elections is the most definite way for all Guyanese to know that they are empowered to put persons in place that will look after their long-term wealth and growth. Yes, there has been many things happening in this country. We have had many kinds of funds. We have had the sugar levy that was played around like a political football, a sovereign wealth fund in its own way that was just Squandermania took care of it. We have had a lot of funds. We have had bauxite funds. We have had one type of funds or the other. It's all been squandered. Do we have any confidence that the politicians past and present can manage oil funds? Viewers, one thing for sure, no spin here. The next annual budget, the next national budget of Guyana will be spending oil money. Tonight, we have a gentleman. Tonight, we have Dr. Parsan, who is a former ambassador to the United States of America and Mexico. He was the executive secretary for the integral development of the OAS, and is presently a special advisor to the World Bank Group, president of the board of Virtual Educa Global Alliance, chairman of the board of directors for Global Alliance for Surgical, Obstetric, Trauma, and Anesthetic Care, and director in several companies. When his prime minister selected him to be an ambassador to the United States, there was a reckoning for the wider world to see, because people are awoken to the fact that here was a man who not only talked the talk, but was walking the talk. He recently made presentations to the GPEX summit in Guyana and is passionate about helping us Guyanese realize and reach our potential. Sir, Dr. Parsan, welcome to this Globespan program.
Thank you, Dr. Mahadeo. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and I'm very much intrigued by your opening comments. Thank you for those.
Thank you. And just before we get to our discussion, I would like the viewers to know a little bit more about this Dr. Parsan. You are well known out there. Anybody can Google the name and you will see how much this gentleman has represented his country and the region by and large in a lot of different countries, a lot of fora all across the world. But before we go there, I would like to run a little video clip. I'm going to ask Devin to please take us there. Let us run this clip for the viewers to see some of what we're talking about and we'll be talking about tonight. Devin?
Ambassador Parsan held the position of Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary to the United States of America, non-resident ambassador to the United Mexican States, and permanent representative of Trinidad and Tobago to the Organization of American States for a period of over 5 years. He also held the cabinet position of Executive Secretary for Integral Development at the Organization of American States. Dr. Parsan earned his undergraduate medical degree at the University of the West Indies, Facility of Medical Sciences, where he graduated with distinction. After spending 8 years as a lecturer and tutor at the Faculty of Medical Sciences, he pursued a Master of Business Administration, where he graduated with a top distinction in his class. He also holds a Registered Financial Consultant degree, a CACM from Harvard University School of Public Health, and a World Trade Professional degree from ITM Worldwide in Sweden. Dr. Parsan was also awarded an honorary doctorate for education, culture, and humanitarian work from the Americana University, registered with Cambridge University and the Congress of Mexico.
Well, there you go to our viewers out there. This gentleman is very special. He is well known across the Caribbean, as I said. Dr. Parsan, welcome again to the program. And just before, if you do not mind me asking this, I know it's not something that you're very comfortable doing, but as part of the introduction, tell us what you are doing presently. I know that you would have served the government in a number of different, different positions and so forth, but what are you doing presently in terms of not just oil and gas, but the other business interests that you have?
Sure. And again, thank you for the opportunity, Dr. Mahadeo. Presently, I serve as Senior Advisor to Dentons, which is actually the world's largest law firm.
That's right.
I'm very happy to announce that Dentons spans over 10 countries of the Caribbean. It's the only pan-Caribbean law firm out there. And also very happy to announce recently the opening of our offices in Guyana. I also have my own consultancy firm here in Washington, D.C. that does development finance. And I also own a company in Florida that does a fair amount of telehealth services with an aim for providing access and affordability to healthcare services. So in a nutshell, I'm project-based, and that's what I've been keeping myself busy doing.
Wonderful. Now, I would like us to get into the discussion about transforming our economy, our oil and gas economy, by drawing on your experience and your interaction with not just the United States government and your own Trinidad and Tobago government, but governments across the world. But before we get to this substantive discussion, I know that you made a presentation at the last GPEX summit in Guyana. What are your thoughts of this summit, and would you say that this summit achieved a particular objective that it set out to do?
In a nutshell, yes. In fact, I was very pleased to see the absolute amount of attention being paid to Guyana by participating in that forum and also being part of the audience and also part of the speakership of the event. What was particularly pleasing to me, and in my many conversations with those participating, is the geographic diversity of those in attendance. I met folks from China, Japan, all the way down to South America, Colombia, across the Caribbean. I saw a very large audience coming from Trinidad and Tobago. I saw Jamaica, and I saw, of course, I met a lot of colleagues and friends from the United States. So congratulations to Guyana and what that was able to do. I was also very pleased to see the way that agenda was done. It captured a lot of what Guyana is thinking through and what ought to be thinking through for future prosperity.
Great.
I am a fan of people-centered governance, and I got the sense that a fair amount of the thinking behind it is, how do we use the opportunity as a platform for prosperity? And those who benefit from prosperity are your citizens.
That's right.
So all in all, I was pleased with it, and I also want the viewership to understand that this is about the patrimony of a country. It's about every single resource, every single drop of oil, every single piece of dirt belongs to the people of Guyana. So the question is, how do we coalesce around that theme and bring prosperity to people?
Correct. But thank you for that. It is interesting because 2 weeks ago, I've had a discussion with 3 of the women leaders in Guyana. And one of them gave an opinion that the GPEX forum, in terms of Guyana and Guyanese earning ability, was more or less there was a barrier to Guyanese participating because even the entrance fee or the registration fee was high in terms of the Guyana earnings and Guyanese readiness to invest. But before we go to the substantive thing, as I said, Dr. Parsan, you would have seen Trinidad go through the waves and the troughs. You would have seen your country go through the highs and lows. One of the concerns that a lot of Guyanese have, among many, I mean, we have concerns that our local content policy is somewhere in the cloud, not where Guyanese know about it. We have concerns about the contracts and their what Guyana can get out of those contracts. We have concerns about the structure and the content of the law that provides for the sovereign wealth fund and a number of things that we will get into. But here is another thing that we have had concerns about, and I'm sure you might have heard the chorus in Trinidad and elsewhere too. You see, a lot of Guyanese firms have felt that they're unable to bid, they're unable to tender for projects that might have earned them a seat at the table where providing the service to the oil companies are concerned, because they're not competing on an equal or a level playing field. Foreign companies come and apply for concessions, duty-free concessions, get their concessions, and therefore their unit cost is going to be lower than a Guyanese firm competing for the same product. The GRA head has argued that no Guyanese firm have applied for the concessions, but here is the problem. Nowhere is an agency being set up to educate the Guyanese that, hey, you could get these facilities if you apply. So how do we wade between all this that's being thrown at us and yet emerge where at least a handful or two handfuls of Guyanese companies can start to be at the table?
That's a golden question, Doc. I'll tell you why. Trinidad had some great lessons. We had some great prosperity. We had some hard lessons and some painful realities. And it's exactly where we were when this boom came. And, let me define a boom. Because it was very clear to me attending JPEX, there is a sense of anticipation. There is a sense of great hope. There's an inflection point in the historical performance of an economy. What does this mean to us? A boom, by definition, could be two things. It could be a period of great economic prosperity, or it could be a loud, resonating sound coming from a crash.
Correct. That is well put.
What kind of history do we want to be on?
That's right.
That's the first thing. I would also suggest that in thinking this through, to get to your question, it involves policy. There is a lot of politics in it, and we could talk about that. It involves people, of course, we mentioned that. It involves a great deal of planning, programming, and process. But here's my thing. A big part of making all this happen is clearly understanding the role of government, the role of the private sector, and the role of partners to both. And I say this to mean, I believe in the scheme of things where we are all at, government ought to be enablers. Government's role is to enable. And part of that ability to enable is enabling the private sector. Trinidad learned those lessons. And getting the private, you're right. I heard the term local content many times during that forum and even beyond the forum. But that also needs to be defined. That needs to be clarified. And that needs to have a great deal of understanding by those who wish to participate in that. A big part of that is the regulatory environment. A big part of that is not just the regulatory environment, but actually the rule of law, which is a step above the regulatory environment, and not rule by law, the rule of law. And there's a nuance between the two.
Right.
And it goes to having the right fiscal regimes in place. It goes to having the right level of training and development for people. Correct. Education, and a big part of this is from rural to the very top. building the advocacy and awareness around what this means to all of us as citizens of the country.
Yes, absolutely. So you're extremely in order there, and here's one of the overriding or overarching concerns for Guyanese, and this is speaking on behalf of many Guyanese who may not have the ability or the forum to come and represent themselves at. The fact that you're right, laws needs to be put in place that can ensure the population, the investors, and everybody else, that the stakeholders, that the oil and its wealth and its impact end up being the positive boom and not the bust. So I want to quote you with a very astute statement you made. You warned at the GPEX forum, you warned that the SWF, the Sovereign Wealth Fund, is not an ATM for the politicians. Therein, in those words, you represented the fear of 700,000 Guyanese, almost all of our population. Expand a little bit more on that.
In Trinidad and Tobago, and you are right, you quoted some figures about 15 billion. My recall is that when we established that fund and we got to a point where we were peaking in it, it was north of $17 billion. Today, you quoted correctly as well, we're at about 16.1. In Trinidad and Tobago, it is 6.1, sorry. 6.1. It is called the Heritage and Stabilization Fund.
That's right.
I love those two words because it is highly reflective of what that fund ought to represent. Heritage suggests us, the people, our patrimony. And stabilization suggests exactly that, for a rainy day.
That's right.
And we use that opportunity. And, I must pay homage and my greatest respect to all the politicians, past and present, post-independence in Trinidad, for having the wisdom in getting us to a point of having an HSF started in the first place, but also creating a very strong education platform for our economy going forward, because it allowed us to blossom and prosper into how we got to where we are. But it goes back to that. It's the people's money for a rainy day.
That's right.
It is not an ATM machine and a willy-nilly slush fund to use as one wishes to. That being said, the right board of governance, the right directors, the transparency mechanisms, the transparency of the entire spend in that wealth fund should be made absolutely available to the John public and Joe Smith and Jody Plummer. That is what is needed, and it comes back to a very critical point. Every major state agency in every country governs the affairs of arms of government. And I said it in JPEX and I'll repeat myself on this platform. Do not put square pegs in wrong holes. Get people who are academically, experientially, and have the technical know-how to help govern a mechanism such as this fund.
That's right. So here is a dichotomy then. The laws permit the politicians to appoint those persons, our current laws. And our history has left us with zero confidence that any of the politicians would really go the road of professionalism and hire people that will be very much professionals in what they're going to do for the Sovereign Wealth Fund. But I want to pick your brain on something. So that's nirvana. That's the ideal situation. The fund should be operated professionally and any number of stakeholders. And the good thing is there are a number of international watchdog agencies and institutes that will now be telling Guyanese people, here is what's happening with your fund. But you know what I find as also good? When a government can hold its own hand back from dipping. In 2008, 2009, when oil and gas prices fell drastically, your government adjusted the budget and drew down on its deposits in the central bank rather than from the fund. That took some strong shoulders and straight backs to do, but it shows the maturity of seriousness with wealth fund, that you don't just use it for just any problem that comes up, because it is long-term in nature, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. It's not just long-term in nature, but one can also use it to become a trigger and an incentive for economic prosperity. By going to the central bank rather than the fund, does a number of things. It's the correct monetary and fiscal policy regime to adopt in order to trigger capitalism at its finest, to keep the economy going. That is how it should be done.
Correct.
Let the market determine those forces. Going to the fund could also be a big part of planning for prosperity with all the accountability mechanisms behind it. And you're right. I see it as medium to long term, and I see other policy measures could be short-term solutions when an economy is experiencing the deficits we had when we had it.
Right. So, but to come back to to a very important point on the same SWF, the crux in the whole thing, crux is probably a bad word to use in this political dynamic we're in, but the important point here is to repeat what you said, that the politicians need to be serious. The people of this country needs to know that they're empowered to watch over the operations of this fund, because it is not a bag to be dipped into by politicians. So what Trinidad also did in 2011, you proposed initiatives. Even though you had the SWF, you proposed initiatives to boost the SWF, which included recommendations that there must be establishment of a minimum withdrawal per year in any 1 year. So you said you were proposing to set. Did you get to that?
I didn't get to that point at JPEX, but the point I did get to, in order to have those policies in place, bear in mind, if the intellectual capacity or weakened institutions that are domiciled in Guyana don't necessarily have the know-how how to implement, bearing in mind, Guyana is a part of international fora.
Correct.
Part of the World Bank, IDB, UN, OAS, etc., etc. The country is in a very good position to go there and ask for these templates, ask for the assistance, ask for the technical know-how. Bring down the experts and create these strategic linkages to build capacity internally. And that's a very serious point, because one of the things that are inhibitory, and if not prohibitive, to foreign direct investment in the oil and gas sector for Guyana is investor confidence and one's ability to attract foreign direct investment. And a big part of that is having those strategic linkages. If you don't know, simply say, I don't know, can I have some help, please?
That's right.
And your member states in these DFI, development financial institutions, the multilateral organizations, so the world is with you to support it, to strengthen the institutions, to build capacity, and to broaden bandwidth.
Absolutely. So just to belabor that point a little bit more, for viewers and for all of Guyana to understand it in as layman terms as possible, the way we shore up our laws, our regulations to manage, to handle a sovereign wealth fund is extremely critical. Trinidad has been successful doing it. I'll repeat something I said in the opening. Norway has over $1 trillion in its sovereign wealth fund. China has over $1 trillion. You know, there's so many countries that has decided this is important. So, Dr. Parsan, I want to jump a little bit, change hats a little bit, jump to another topic that looks to garner your comment on two things. The viewer Kevin Tolaram has asked, and I want to take some time to address what our viewers are asking. What are your thoughts on Guyana's desire, or should they think of doing this? That is a potential to renegotiate all contracts. As you know, with one of the contracts we have, I think 1 or 2% as royalty.
Doc, my response to that is a contract is a contract is a contract. It's an agreement that has been signed and fully executed. I think what, even before, and bearing in mind as well, vast amounts of money have also been invested to get to where we are. In fact, when I was in JPEX, I recall that the figure so far is close to $180 million, and with 40 dry holes and the 41st bearing some fruit.
Yes.
I think it is up to both parties at some point in the future, bearing in mind the respect for the rule of law and respecting the sanctity of contracts.
Correct.
One just cannot go and willy-nilly dismantle a contract because it is out of favor with politicians and the wider citizenry because it's a country that adheres to the principles of rule of law and respect for sanctity of contracts. I think it will be in the wisdom of the affected parties when they are both ready to sit and have a dialogue around it. I am not a fan of abhorrent political interference and dismantling for the sake of dismantling even before prosperity has been brought to the top.
But certainly you support dialogue.
I absolutely support open dialogue, not just dialogue that is open for the understanding of the average John Smith.
That's right. So the second question from Annie Beams. Dr. Parsan, what is your view on the oil revenue being held in an account outside of Guyana? Should that be, is that something good, or do you think long term it will be bad for Guyana?
I mean, when revenue, picture this. If you go to work and you make money, and you're a smart investor, or you're slightly investment savvy, what would you do? I would take my earnings, have it in my domestic bank, but also think through how do I make money on my money? How do I invest? Therefore, it's an understandable question. And my response is that I would be hybridizing both. I would obviously want to domicile some of my investment, but also how do I create investment vehicles for the population at large with the anticipated amounts of revenue that could be coming from it. So that is a question for your central bank. It's a question for your Minister of Finance and those who are investment savvy enough to take a sovereign fund and invest it as all countries do.
Correct. Which comes back to the point that you made earlier, that the management team of the sovereign wealth fund is extremely important because they have to be savvy about investments around the world and what would bring us huge growth. Now, the other thing that another viewer has inboxed me about is we talked to the Guyanese people about sovereign wealth fund, and of course the fund is going to get returns and so forth. The question about establishing a minimum withdrawal from the fund in any 1 year. In your experience, has that minimum withdrawal been only on the interest, or was government allowed? Was the Trinidad government allowed to touch the reserve itself?
I do not know. I mean, logic would suggest that you want to keep the fund active.
Correct.
But I would not be able to, it'll be false advertising for me to delve into answering that question.
Okay. And I guess at some stage the fund itself would have been used because you came down from, 17 to probably about 6.1.
Sure.
But the other interesting thing is that I think one of the sound bites I would have heard or read from what you have done is that the investment or the projects being used nationally now, using the oil money, that is, it should be more focused towards creating self-sustaining drives and self-sustaining industries. Do you want to expand a little bit on that?
Absolutely. I think you're spot on. Trinidad and Tobago attempted several times to diversify its economy away from oil and gas.
Yes.
What we did a good job at was diversifying the oil and gas industry vertically deep. So we went on to become a gas-based economy, then we went into deep downstream such as ammonia, urea, methanol. We became one of the largest exporters in the world of these three products and more. So that's something we were able to diversify, but vertically deep, not necessarily horizontally across.
Right.
The reason I'm going into this is to get to that level of horizontal diversification, even before first oil, we need basic enabling infrastructure, roads, bridges, social services, education, an infrastructure for healthcare, super important. The point being, I think to create a sustainable economic model to guarantee prosperity, that type of planning must go into the mainstream thinking today. I was very happy to read a document, I believe it was called the the Green State Development Plan Vision 2040, I was very happy to hear a few words, key words in there: education, social protection, low carbon. These are very futuristic moments of thought that went into that plan for Ghana in 2040. And if it is actually actioned, that development plan, to the point where it could be, I think it is a good model for economic prosperity for the citizens going forward. The plan is a bit conflicting, by the way. It's difficult to talk about ONG, oil and gas and first oil, and then talk about low carbon on the other hand.
Correct. Yes.
But we can get into the nitty-gritty of that. But it's good food for thought, because that to me also suggests climate smart infrastructure. It suggests resilient infrastructure.
That's right.
That's the thinking behind it.
That's right. So one of the other questions that I have for you is Trinidad, in terms of its socio-political dynamic, in terms of the country's population. As you know, you've had a lot of Guyanese over the years rapping at your doors and finding a way to live in the country. But you, by and large, maintain the population size. Guyana has porous borders. Guyana has a lot of work to do if it were to get to that state. But here is the question. There has been a lot of political talk about giving out cash handouts, cash payouts to what some politicians think they will determine as the poor and the needy. So they're not talking, mind you, about building institutions as much as, and I know it's election talk. What are your thoughts in terms of cash handouts and cash giveouts?
Teach a man to fish versus give him fish. But if he's hungry, give him fish.
Correct.
In the short term.
That's
so
right.
I think I would, it's a hybrid of the two. I would surely want, again, going back to the fundamental role of government, is to enable.
Mm-hmm.
And how do I understand the immediate needs? I don't wish to see any of my citizens hungry. I don't wish to see any of my citizens without basic social services. I don't wish to see any of my citizens unhealthy and uneducated. How do you treat those immediate needs, but also plan for their own prosperity at an individual level? And mind you, I have seen a tsunami of people coming into Guyana offering a lot of advice. But this is not about what Guyana, this is not about what others want. It's about what Guyana needs for itself.
That's right.
What is your own domestic model?
That's right.
And filter the advice, understand what is useful. How do I create the infrastructure to receive that advice and plan for my own prosperity?
That's right. But there is a dichotomy, isn't there? I mean,
yes.
we have seen Trinidad go through a lot of political turmoil over the years. You've had your ups and downs. You have had so much problems, and you know, I'm going to say it how I feel. You've had almost an unmanageable crime situation. Trinidad has at one time, I don't know if you still are, Trinidad has at one time been like the kidnap capital of the world, of the Caribbean. So government problems has been there, yet you have successfully managed to keep your oil thinking, or your SWF is what I'm getting at, on a separate, clear stream. How did you manage this?
Because it was quarantined the way it should have been quarantined, and that goes back to understanding the separation of powers, the respect for the rule of law, and the constant drive to strengthen institutions.
That's right.
And when you're able to separate those and box them in and have them play their respective roles, you almost mitigate a potential challenge of guaranteeing failure and demise of the economy.
Correct.
And it's super important that a model is created as nimble, integratable, and adaptable to the changing needs as you develop, bearing in mind the independence and autonomy of the respective institutions and agencies of state and the roles they have to play.
Absolutely. So I'm not sure of the construct of your law, and I'm not going to ask you to answer now. Maybe if you do know, please let us know. We had Kevin Ramnarayan, former minister, on a show a couple of weeks ago too. the Guyana's law, where the SWF and even local content policy is concerned, Guyana's law is designed in such a way as to give the Minister of Finance absolute power on who to appoint and what to do and final decision on investments and so. Is it something you would abhor? Is it something you would advise against?
You know, I don't like the word absolute as a start.
Mm-hmm.
And it is always saying absolute power corrupts absolutely.
That's right. That's
so
right.
That saying alone is, I'm not a fan of it. But also, I think, I don't know the exact Guyanese model, but surely it goes back to a point. When a minister has that authority, the ultimate decision-making body, the senior prefect, as it were, is a body, not an individual. It becomes the responsibility of cabinet. And if it goes from cabinet and it has to be discussed further in parliament, that's our system.
That's right.
However, I think it will not be wise to have any sole individual in that, with that power to make those absolute decisions. Anybody and everything requires a sense of accountability, transparency, and having the ability to question and debate something as important as this.
Correct. So, given your interactions in the recent weeks on the Guyana scene and with all the investors and stakeholders and so forth, especially the JPEX forum, you have your fingers on the pulse as to the path Guyana is on. One of the viewers have sent in a question that what pitfalls, are there any pitfalls that you are seeing now that we really need to address on the current path if we are to continue on this critical path we're on? What pitfalls you see that we need to be cognizant of immediately?
I think immediately it's an issue of getting your local content policies right. I think immediately it's about strengthening the institutions of oversight. I think immediately it's also about coming up with the plans for asset management. Make sure, it's one thing having, as first soil is lifted, what does that mean for the infrastructure going forward? If that is ignored and not put as a line item, as an expense item, you could fall into the trap we fell into over time.
Correct.
I think it's also important that you get your institutions and your industrial relations practices ironed out and very clear, because the last thing we need is an unstable, contentious industrial relations environment that is counterproductive to what, and if not catabolic to the opportunity at hand. I think that needs to be dealt with. And I also feel very early on, I am not a fan of political interference. I'm not saying it occurs, but I want us to be cognizant of something. I call it agenda alignment. And I've seen this problem in the Caribbean, where there's a political agenda and there's a national development agenda. And depending on the season, including the silly season of elections, one superimposes itself on the other.
That's right.
And if we are dealing with the patrimony of a society, that patrimony should be directed towards a national development agenda and no one's political agenda. And I think it should be demanded by the citizenry that these agendas don't superimpose itself on each other.
Correct. So in other words, as Guyanese, I'm going to put it in my words here, as Guyanese to the viewers out there, we have to take charge of our business. And we got to ensure that, as I keep preaching every week when I'm on this show, that do not make the mistake, to all my brothers and sisters, do not make the mistake of thinking it's the government running this country. It's the people. We, the people, must realize we must run this country. The public servants are there to serve us, not the other way around. Dr. Parsan, here is another question I have for you.
Sure.
Over the years, you Trinidadians would have been involved from investment side, the stakeholder side, political side, lawmaking side, but also on the employment side, you would have become integrated into the entire oil production thing, into the whole oil production industry. Your people may have been employed or would have been employed, I presume, on the oil frontiers themselves. Guyanese have a challenge presently because we feel that from day one, Guyanese have been left out. Employment opportunities on the barges and so forth. We have a saying here, I don't know how you say it in Trinidad, cat stole our dinner. So we feel that, so how did Trinidad manage to ensure that its own people were employed on the oil rig and on the oil front?
Doc, let me break that question up into two pieces. Right? On one hand, it's quantity of employment versus quality of employment.
That's right.
On the other hand, it's about having access to opportunities. Right? Trinidad and Tobago, in its wisdom, and let me go back, I am non-political in my statement. I support every sitting prime minister post-independence for pushing the education agenda of Trinidad and Tobago. We did it, and we did it well, to the point where we focused on enhancing and creating energy skill sets, and Trinidad and Tobago became a net exporter of energy skill sets. I met people in oil fields as far as north as Alaska and all the way down in the southern corner of South America, because we exported energy skill sets. It's all over the African continent. Here's the other thing. I think the deeper question for us is, how do we move the workforce of Guyana from what is now and can be considered to be net unskilled labor,
correct,
to semi-skilled and skilled labor? So we enhance both the quantity of employment and the quality of employment, and access to opportunity becomes guaranteed in that scenario. But in addition to that, I think it is expected that as the opportunities present themselves, it is made available to the citizens of Guyana. But they also have to prepare themselves via the skills that are required for the jobs and the experience behind serving in that particular set of roles. That to me is the key to unleashing the potential of the people.
Correct. And therein lies what we would have said, what you mentioned yourself earlier. When we talk education and investment in education, to our viewers out there, investment in education that's happening now, all the manifestos are going to get it. It does not just mean investment into more primary and tertiary education, but skill-based, to give us a place at the table, to give us a place on the rigs, to give us, and this is what you're referring to, that we enhance our own ability by shoring up our own knowledge and skills. Here is another question from Patrick Gordon Rodriguez. How will Guyanese diversify its industry? Because you mentioned earlier you became one of the largest exporters of methanol, ammonia, and so forth. How will Guyanese diversify its industry if we are only interested in selling crude without a refinery? Is it something that we need to address in the medium term?
Very, very good question there by Patrick. Patrick, congratulations on that question. The bipolarity of that question suggests the following. Trinidad and Tobago became an oil-based economy. We evolved to become a gas-based economy, and then we went deep downstream with gas, hence the ammonia, urea, methanol. As it stands, I think it's about leveraging the value chain in oil. It seems as though, so far, Guyana is going to become an oil-based economy, not necessarily a gas-based economy, but there are a lot of opportunities in an oil-based industry, in an oil-based economy. So it clearly the thinking has to be, how do we manage the value chain and explore and exploit that value chain if it is on the path, let's say for 25 years as an oil-based economy. And again, that is where your strategic linkages with the right institutions globally comes into play. That is where educated your skills base as a domestic economy comes into play. And we lived it, and we Guyana has to build the plane as they fly it, but there's support around them.
Correct. So, but it is something that you think that we need to, because while it's not doable on day 1 or day 10, it's certainly doable on day 50. And Absolutely. So it's something that needs to be a conversation that needs to be continuous.
Absolutely.
So, in terms of the skill set, if we go back for a minute to skill set and training and education, one of the questions Annie Bims would have asked about introduction of the topic in schools and so forth. But how did Trinidad plan? What have you done in terms of education itself? I mean, you have St. Augustine campus there, which is an added benefit. But what would you have done incisively as an intervention on the educational field that bolstered your own advancement in the oil and gas sector?
If we have to take the 3 levels, the 3, I believe there are 4 levels of education: primary, secondary, tertiary, and if not quaternary, which is employer-based education. Right. Trinidad and Tobago has been, based on the Commonwealth system of education, extremely high literacy rate at the level of a grand population, 98%. That's a good start.
That's good.
Then successive governments introduced, a particular government introduced what we call GATE, to ensure the affordability and access to those who are willing and able to enter university at the expense of state, with an understanding that they come back and they contribute to economic prosperity of the country. Then, of course, we had the very strong and able University of the West Indies, with its various functional areas that enable the environment. And then later on, we were able to establish the University of Trinidad and Tobago that became a quasi energy-based university, training for those skill sets. And perhaps I don't know if the conversations have deepened, but perhaps this is a good time to have dialogue with the UTT. Mm-hmm. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel. It is there. Correct. And that is where a good cooperation, collaboration, collusion framework can take place between institutions and use it to strengthen your own systems back at home in Guyana.
Correct. Well said, because education and the state of our own university, it's something that has been bemoaned by a lot of people. People who go to University of Guyana. I myself have been there, and I do believe there is need for a real revolution within the university itself. What is the shortest time you think that Guyanese can, quote unquote, take over workforce in the oil and gas industry? In other words, what advice would you give us that, Guyanese, prepare yourselves, start getting your act right, and in X years, go and knock at these doors, because you must be ready by then?
Here's the thing. I am medically trained.
Yes.
5 years in medical school. Am I a good doctor or a good vet or a good dentist? I don't know. But over the years, my skill sets developed, and one could say, okay, I'm a great practitioner. So, to answer your question, it depends. It's an individually inclined question, and it's an institutional question. Strengthen the institutions, take those who have shown or are showing great potential, leverage them as quickly as possible, get them to that level of skills requirement, and let that become the core of your economy, at least an ONG economy, and allow others to prosper from it.
Right. Thank you for that, because I think what we need to realize as a people too, especially in this election season, is that let us not, I'm not going to ask you to comment here, Doc, but, to my Guyanese brothers and sisters, let us not be overwhelmed by the political talks that we lose sight of what is important for the long-term development of this country. Look, there are huge areas in Guyana, not geographic, but huge areas that requires attention. Like we said, education, and not just an elections thing, but long-term sustainable education. Guyana should now follow what Trinidad did, what Barbados has done and continues to do. Be a leader. Have education almost as if it's part of tourism. Train people from all over the world here. all of these things Dr. Parsan is talking about in the beginning when we started talking about this whole oil and gas transformation, that we could invest in self-sustaining sectors of the society, that as oil and gas as a resource starts to diminish, we grow on our own. By then we don't need it. Because, Doc, 2 weeks ago I had this discussion with people, and you look at places like Singapore and such places, guess what? Their top contributor to the economy is now agriculture. Mm-hmm. And it speaks to their, as you said in the beginning, their selective overall investment in self-sustaining areas.
Absolutely, and it goes back. I have heard numerous conversations around the whole idea of a resource curse. Guyana cannot afford to leave other sectors behind. Development is sector agnostic. Not because there is a hope and a great anticipation of first oil, it becomes your only focus. There are many other additive components to a sustainable economy. Agriculture is one.
Correct.
So I think we need to keep that not at the back of our minds, but at the front of our minds.
That's right. Well, unfortunately, I don't know how much I hope I'm not putting you on a spot, because tonight is not a political talk. But unfortunately, to my brothers and sisters out there, we have done so much harm to agriculture in Guyana that it's going to take a lot to bring it back to the level it was even 10 years ago. Sugar is dead, rice is going, everything. All the agriculture sector has suffered great surgical excision, and Doc, you may not know this. We had a COI in Guyana that recommended not to close the sugar estates, but eventually they were closed, and there was no real alternate plans made for the population. Let us go to another question relating back to the oil and gas sector. Is it safe, Kevindra Tularam is asking, is it safe to say that for Guyana and its people to be in full command or control of the sector, or is it safe to say that they should be in full control, or would it take them longer than expected because of political framework? Did politics interfere with Trinidad's maturity where oil and gas thinking was concerned?
No, I not necessarily so. I think there was a fair amount of strong institution, a good regulatory environment to make it to make it happen. And when there were incidences of political interference, it was called out. It happens.
Great.
It's called out.
Yes.
At the end of the day, to answer the question from Kevin, I do not think, and none of us should think that Guyana is in a position to be in full control. It's new. There's a newness. First oil has not come to the surface as yet.
That's right.
And there's a lot of learning to do. There's a lot of enabling to happen. And I think with the right support and the right advice and the right guidance from those who have lived it before, Guyana could, obviously you want to control your destiny, but right now, the pen is in Guyana's hand. The sheet of paper is white. The script is yours.
Correct.
And it's up to the policymakers, the politicians of the day, and the people to write their own narrative for prosperity.
Thank you. I know we're taking a lot of time. We have to be wrapping up because we're almost out of program time. But it's been a wonderful discussion. I'm going to ask you to take your business side out. Put on your medical training cap on.
Sure.
Doc, I've received this question from a medical personnel. What steps does Guyana need to take to be prepared medically for oil and gas? The Barnes unit in GPHC has just a few beds and a small number of persons trained to handle a crisis. So put on your medical cap and tell us.
That's a valid question. Part of the ancillary support services to support an ONG industry is healthcare and healthcare provision. Not just from the nature of the question, an emergency situation. I will take it even further upstream. Wellness position. You want healthy workers, you want fit workers, you want workers who can react to emergency situations, but you also want a capable set of staff and that's well resourced in a modern, up-to-date healthcare infrastructure to respond in need of a crisis. This has happened. We have seen oil gush hundreds of feet in the air. Should there be a blowout? Are you prepared? So all of that will be part of the ancillary support services model in thinking through what is needed to support the industry.
Correct.
Particularly given the fact that Guyana is offshore based at the moment.
That's right.
You're not onshore to drive down the street and get medical care, assuming you have a good hospital.
Correct.
You have to bear in mind there are logistics that would find its way in between an emergency situation and people getting the care that they need. All this needs to be thought through.
Gotcha. So, and finally, just before we wrap up, emergencies. The question I have for you is, who will be held responsible, or how responsible will Guyana be if, God forbid, there is an untoward happenstance out there?
Doc, safety is everybody's responsibility. Trinidad has had an excellent safety record throughout the years. In fact, it's globally exemplary, our safety record, and that's because we have been sticklers for checkboxing all safety requirements, from captain to cook and cleaner. It is everybody's responsibility.
Wonderful. Doc, I'm going to come back to you in a minute. 1 minute, we're going to go off just for a commercial break. The conversation was so good, actually, I forgot completely about going off on a commercial break. But we're going to take a 1 minute break, and I'm going to come to you for your closing comments.
Sure.
Looking for an embroidery service or advertising services? Look no further than Inspire Incorporated. Get your very own personalized items that include rubber stamps, ID cards, mouse pads, diaries, polos, office wear, and so much more. Create your own logo or messages on any substract. It's very quick and efficient. Call Inspire Incorporated today at 222-2042 or visit at 62 Area Q, Turkine, Guyana. Support Globespan 24x7 initiatives by sponsoring our programs. Our goal is to bring all sides to the table, and with your help, this can become possible. With your support, we can shape a greater nation together. Contact sales at globespan247.com for more information, or inbox us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn.
Thank you. Doc, just before I hand over to you for your closing comments, it's been a real wonderful discussion. To our viewers out there, tonight we have looked at transforming Guyana into an oil and gas perspective, into an oil and gas producers, into an oil and gas sector, but by changing our thinking and understanding some of the challenges and understanding what we the people need to be conscious of. Critical in our discussion tonight would have been areas of education and areas of developing self-sustaining areas that will be long-term, and especially looking at the Sovereign Wealth Fund and the local content policy. But also we touched on emergency planning and some of the other more important salient points. Dr. Neil Parsan is a person who has, he has basically walked the globe, visited countries all over the world to have discussions about oil and gas. And tonight, his experience has really borne a lot of fruits for us in Guyana. And I'm sure, Doc, when I say this, I'm surely hoping you would agree that let's do this again, because Guyana, it cannot be too much for Guyana. We need to be prepared. Over to you, Doc, for your closing comments.
A couple of things. I would like to say, first of all, just remember, I believe society develops on three legs: government, civil society, NGOs, etc., and the private sector. All three legs must be there. If one is missing, the stool will fall.
Correct.
So there must be a sense of inclusivity in the development with the ONG sector, not exclusivity by any one party or any one set of contractors, etc. Secondly, bear in mind, Guyana has friends. Guyana has partners, internationally, regionally, nationally, and otherwise. Use them wisely. Thirdly, right. We need leadership. We need a champion to ensure that this is kept on the straight and narrow, to do the right things and to do, and it's about doing things right and doing the right things.
Correct.
And I will also say, I brought up the point earlier about agenda alignment, the political agenda and the national development agenda. The people ought to be overseeing this and always being cognizant of it. Strengthening regulatory agencies, and lastly, people-centered development, your human resource development plan to take this forward.
Wonderful. Doc, it's been a wonderful discussion, and I hope that we can do this again, because there are other areas I would really like for us to touch on, especially the emergency preparedness and effects, environmental effects and effects on animals, and you guys would have gone through this. So I'm hoping that with Globespan's permission, we can do this sometime again in the future, and of course, depending on your timing and availability too.
Sure.
But thank you so very much for being here. On behalf of the Globespan team and all of our viewers in and out of Guyana, thank you most wholeheartedly for being there. And we know Trinidad at this moment, and you and Kevin and other people we have spoken to are like our brothers at this stage, ready to help and ready to give us help as and whenever we need. So thank you, Doc. Thanks to Globespan, thanks to Devin, Kumar, and of course Nohar Singh for allowing us to have this wonderful and informative discussion tonight. To our viewers out there, have a wonderful night, have a blessed night, and good night, everyone.
Thank you.